The high lift blade is what comes OEM, comes stock on your 52-inch commercial rider, right? We'll use that mower as our mower today just because this blade would go on that mower. If you have a 52-inch grandstand, this is the old style with the smaller hole. There is a new style with a larger size hole. This is the 5/8 hole. This blade is what comes on an OEM. And so why does it come on an OEM? It's because it's a pretty great blade. It has high vacuum, has a very good cut quality, and it disperses the grass the furthest out of any of the blades. This larger fin here creates the most amount of vacuum. It also helps whack it out of the discharge chute the furthest, right? So the downside of this blade is it has a larger lift portion, right? And so this actually, it's hitting more air, and it's gonna require more energy and more effort and more horsepower to actually operate this blade. This blade, that is its major downfalls. It actually uses a lot more gas. It is actually a less fuel efficient blade. It does do a great job, but it is kind of throwing efficiency to the wind for the sake of quality cut, right? But if your goal is to have the best looking cut and to disperse the grass clippings as evenly and as far as humanly possible, the high lift blade is the best option for you. Let's say you've been mowing a particular yard that's very, very dense, right? And you notice that your engine is bogging when you're in that. It's having a hard time making it through that grass. There is an option that performs really well still, offers great cut still, but has a little less lift, and it compromises, it draws back a little bit of that dispersion, and it actually has a little more inertia because it has more weight, and it can do basically that same job and require a little less power. So if you look at the difference here between a high lift and a mid lift, this is the mid lift, this is the blade we're talking about now, there's no cutout. You can see that this material has been removed, this material has not been removed. This blade has a little more meat on it and a little less lift on it, right? The lifting fin is a little lower, which requires a little less horsepower to operate this at the same speed. And it maintains its inertia a little better in the thick grass. So it's just an interesting point that you can opt out of the high lift, which is the OEM standard blade, and go for a mid lift, and you're gonna notice a little less dispersion. It's gonna not shoot it out quite as far, but it might be able to power through some of that really thick, heavy stuff this summer. And if you're having problems with your engine feeling like it's bogging, it might be a good option to maybe try going a little bit lower lift. You know, as you kind of bog, you'll also notice that's when you get the stragglers, right? The little standers, the little pieces that don't get cut. And that's sometimes because your deck is getting clogged up, it's getting overwhelmed, there's too much grass, it's too turbulent, and going with a slightly lower lift during this time of year can actually help with that. TORO actually calls the mid lift on their catalog their best cutting blade, their best overall, which is just pretty interesting because you would think they would put that one on OEM, but they put the high lift on, which is just interesting. I don't know if it's because this one looks really nice when it disperses really, really far, but it says this one's the best overall, but this one's the best quality cut. This one's the mid blade is the best overall, which is interesting. Guys, let's just talk a little bit about basic physics of blades, right? Just so like we can wrap our heads around why they do what they do and how they work. But a blade is like a fan, right? When this thing is whirling, it is lifting air, it is hitting air, it is creating upward draft, right? It is helping the grass that is maybe wispy, limp in the hot summer sun, it helps it stay up straight because it's creating that suction, right? And that's when that blade can come by and make contact. It's just like the equivalent of holding a thread tight or leaving a thread loose. If I had a knife and I had a piece of string or thread and I wanted to cut that thread, if I just held one side and tried to slice it, it would have to be a heck of a sharp knife, or it had to be really, really quick to cut that thread. But if I were to hold both ends of the thread and hold it tight and somebody were to cut it, it'd be super easy to cut. And so the tighter you can pull that thread, the easier it is to cut. And the height of the sail is the ability to hold that blade taut, right? Some grass doesn't need as much suction. Some grass is very lush and crispy and structurally sound, right? It holds itself up better. Like a St. Augustine is not necessarily super wispy. It is like a crisp leaf of lettuce, right? It holds its own self up. You don't necessarily need a high lift blade. You could go with a mid or low lift blade because that blade of grass, at least at the range you're cutting it, once you get, if it's really, really tall, like 10 inches, it might be a little wispy at top, but it's not a very wispy grass down at your 3.5, 4.5. But a grass like Bahia that are like a thinner blade, longer blade, they have a faster grow time, they have their shoots up and all that sort of thing, you might need more vacuum, more suction, and that's when you might want to go with a higher vacuum blade, a higher lift blade. But there's a balance, right? With the higher lift comes more sandblasting. Wears your deck out, wears your blade out. You know, most of the time you see a blade worn not on its leading edge. I mean, you'll see dull blades all the time, but most of the times why we have to like retire a blade when it comes in for sharpening is not because of its leading edge. It's normally because of its back end. You'll see the back of the blade, aka the sail, worn thin. This will become so thin, it'll become paper thin, it'll become wafer thin, it'll become ragged and ripped and torn, and the back sail will fade away before the leading edge does. And it's because that sand is coming up and this fin is hitting that sand, and it's just sandblasting all day long, right? And so this wears thin very quickly. And as these get dull, the grass is, instead of being cut, it's whipping. And you wouldn't think grass could wear through metal, but eventually it does. You cut enough grass and that stuff's just ripping and it's whipping, and it's just gonna help wear through these things. Because grass gets sandy too. You know, it's not just grass. Like if you were to just grab a handful of grass and eat it, you'd have a mouthful of sand most of the time, because when rain falls on Balde and all that stuff, it's splashing sand up onto the grass. And so sandblasting does happen to these blades. There's a lot I could say about the different blade types, but these are the 5 main blades that you'll see available for most of your commercial machines. Starting from your left is the high lift blades, the mid lift blades, low lift, recycling, atomic blades. It's important to know what blades to use, why, and when. Whether it's summer or winter or fall, there's different blade types for all types of scenarios, cutting styles, grass types, and we're gonna kind of just dabble and touch on some of these things right now.